tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. It is Wednesday. That means it's our Millennial Round Table. We have our two millennials here, and we'll certainly welcome your phone calls if you'd like to join the conversation. Allie Beth Stuckey with us so often and was off last week, but we are privileged to have her with us, at least for a little bit, and then she's going to head on to The Blaze, which is another place where she has been getting a lot of exposure, known as the conservative millennialist, and always great to have you in studio with us.
Thank you, Kerby. Glad to be here.
And we have posted one of her videos, which you can watch and we'll talk about in just a minute. Grant Skeldon's been with us before, and an individual I've known off the air as well as on the air. He is the director of the Initiative Network. And Grant, welcome back to Point of View.
Thanks for having me.
Talk about the Initiative Network for just a minute. We did when you were here a couple of weeks ago, but I, especially since you have some of your colleagues here with us today, would like everyone to not only in the Dallas area know what you're doing, but to actually think about in these other places, because we broadcast in 42 different states,
right,
where they could do the same sort of thing in their community. So talk about the Initiative Network, if you might.
Yeah, I think the main goal of Initiative is to train up young Christian leaders that are going into the culture. Very similar to what Allie is doing is, I felt like it's ironic that when Jesus comes to change the world, how many religious leaders did he choose to follow him and be one of his disciples? There's like none. He picked a whole bunch of marketplace leaders. And so I do think that the church, unfortunately, is losing its voice into the culture a lot.
Well said.
And we mostly focus on training vocational ministers. And so what we say is if seminaries are training for pastors for the church, we want to train missionaries for the city. And what we mean by that is going into the city. That means the politics of the city, the media of the city, the arts and entertainment of the city, impacting the family, those young adults that are in love with Christ, but they also want to change the culture, not just in the four walls of the church.
I know that both you and Nick Pitts and others crossed paths in a place called the Movement Day, and that's one of the ideas that was first started in New York City and here in Dallas and other places. But again, there's another illustration of really trying to get young voices in every area of life.
Yeah, and what I love about Movement Day is that they gather the leaders that have really devoted their lives over the last 10, 15 years. Let's say a nonprofit leader in South Dallas or West Dallas. There's apparently around 29,000 registered nonprofits in Dallas. So as much as millennials want to be a part of the next movement, the reality is there's probably a man that's been faithful for a long period of time in a community. And so I'm a big fan of connecting passion to the wisdom of generations before us. And so Movement Day provides that platform.
Very good. Again, you have links to both the Conservative Millennialist as well as Initiative Network, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. But Allie Beth, I thought I'd come to you because we love to watch some of your videos. The one that you've posted most recently, I have one from Fox News, No Safe Spaces. And over the last couple of weeks, we've seen this growing violence both on campus and in the community. And I think there is a relationship between safe places and violence, because safe places are this idea that I don't want to hear anything that is hostile to my view. And certainly violent reaction is the next step. So I see a connection. Maybe you don't, but I'd like to hear what you have to say.
Yes. Isn't it ironic that the people that are defending their safe spaces are doing so through very unsafe and violent measures? But I think it's because of this idea of safe spaces. That the people who are protecting safe spaces, they see themselves as moral vigilantes. They almost have a religious motivation behind what they think that they're defending. They call themselves anti-fascist. They call themselves the resistance. They think that they are on the right side of history. And when you give yourself that kind of significance, and when you place yourself in the position of saying, okay, well, I'm the hero of this story, or I'm the vigilante of this story, then there is no end to what you will try to do to protect your side. They think that they are basically defeating what they would call the modern day Nazis or the neo-Nazis. And they've called conservatives in that camp. They've said everyone who follows Trump is a fascist. They're wrong. They're taking away our rights. We have to defend our safe spaces. That's why you see this violence. That's how they justify it, by saying, well, we're basically warriors for what is right and good. Now they're simultaneously saying that right and wrong don't exist. They're also moral relativists while telling everyone that what they believe is wrong, but we don't even have to get into the irony of it.
Part of it also is a sense of self-preservation because, as I've told many of our listeners before, I was born in Berkeley, so I tend to pay attention to what's happening at UC Berkeley, and there's been some interesting things. Well, there were at least two different columnists in the local paper, and both of them said, this is not violence, this is defense. As a matter of fact, if I do not speak out against, and at first it was Milo Yiannopoulos, and then it's Heather McDonald, and more recently it's been a variety of others like Ann Coulter, that I'm threatened. And so it isn't just that you're wrong and you're evil, but it's if I let your views be heard, my own existence is threatened. Is that an overreaction, perhaps?
But is it? I would really want to ask. They can say that all they want to, but show me the facts. Show me the statistic or the story where Ann Coulter spoke and everyone actually turned to stone. Or, someone said something that you disagreed with and you were actually physically in pain. I mean, these are the same people that decry the evils of white privilege. This is about as privileged as it gets. If you look at the violence that people are actually suffering throughout the world, your microaggressions that you are suffering based on your emotions and how you think that you're marginalized, they really pale in comparison to what other people are struggling with. And I think that they fail to see that it is a privilege of living in America that they get to protest, that they get to riot, and that they get to be offended by politicians. And they don't see that. And that makes me sad. They lack so much self-awareness that they don't see that they're enjoying the privileges of the country that they say that they hate.
Grant Skeldon, let me come to you because one of the things you and I've talked about off air is there a parenting issue here? Some people say, why is this surfacing now? There was a time when you had on college campuses the idea that I may disagree with you, but I defend your right to say that. But now there's kind of no, I don't even want to hear your point of view. You might hurt my feelings. Where'd that come from? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I do think that, I do think that every generation just repels a little bit from the generation before.
Of course.
We all asked ourselves, or basically told ourselves, when I grow up, I'm never going to do this that my mom does, or when I grow up, I'm never going to do this that my dad did. Yeah. So I do think one thing our parents did, the irony is we're millennials, conservative millennial. If you're somewhat articulate, confident, mature, and you're a millennial, you now can represent a whole thing.
Yes.
And so, with that, we always got to hear the trophy thing. I hear it all the time. And I think the irony is it's as if me and Allie, when we were 6 years old, came up with a committee to get our parents to give us trophies. And so I think the irony is we're being made fun of for this thing that our parents did. Yeah, and I do think
boomers
that
or
was
Gen Xers did,
probably in response to my grandparents, though. They're the generation that tell the stories about how when they were a kid, they had to walk 2 miles to school with their brother on their back and in the snow and stuff. And so I think it was tough love for my parents' generation. So they're being a lot softer on us, but there are repercussions because what I was sharing is that I think a lot of Xers save millennials from their problems and from dealing with them. Mm-hmm. But if you really think about the most intimate times you have with God, they come in those times. They
sure do.
And so what we can sometimes be doing is saving us from the Savior. And so I'm trying to explain to parents, if you save your young adults from dealing with these places or trying to come up with, safe spaces, which don't really probably exist, then you could be saving them from learning how to deal with the realities of this world.
Let's take a break, talking about helicopter parents or snowplow parents, but also saving them from the Savior, saving them from the pain. How many times have we learned things in the midst of pain? We'll continue our conversation with Grant Skeldon and Allie Beth Stuckey right after this.
This
case involving religious liberty, a Kentucky court ruled that a print shop does not have to make gay pride t-shirts. The dispute arose a number of years ago when the Gay and Lesbian Services Organization asked Hands On Original to make t-shirts with the name and logo of the Pride Festival. Blaine Adamson said he refused to print the shirts because it violated his business policy of not printing messages that endorse a position in conflict with his convictions. Although he referred the homosexual group to another printing company to fulfill the order, the LGBT advocates filed the complaint with the County Human Rights Commission. The commission argued that he was discriminating against the homosexual group. Now, Mr. Adamson offered examples of other orders he refused. These included one that used an offensive word and another one that was a depiction of Jesus dressed as a pirate. It's also worth mentioning that he regularly does business with the LGBT community and even employs homosexuals. This appeals court ruling is encouraging. We wouldn't demand that a print shop owned by a vegetarian should be forced to print flyers for a cattlemen's association. We shouldn't force a print shop owned by an African American to print posters for a white supremacist group. But we rarely hear about such conflicts for two reasons. First, if a print shop declined to print something, the customer would merely go to another shop and not bother to file a complaint. Second, most customers would probably avoid a print shop that might object to their message. That is the difference. In many of these cases, LGBT members specifically target Christian printers, bakers, florists, and photographers in order to create a problem and then report it to the local or state human rights organization. I'm encouraged that common sense is broken out, at least in one court in this country. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Millennial Round Table, if you'd like to join our conversation today, 1-800-351-1212. Have a number of articles that we've posted today. One that Grant Skeldon's written about job hopping. One we'll get into about discipling millennials. That's a video that you may want to watch. And, of course, we're talking at the moment about a video that has been done by Allie Beth Stuckey, actually with Fox News. And if you go to her website, you can see all sorts of different videos. But for just a few more minutes, let's talk about that, because it could be parenting. It could be a variety of other things. But Allie Beth, when we talk about this idea of safe spaces, even if that may exist on the college campus, I can't find any place where that exists out there in the real world. What about you?
I haven't found it either. And I think these students, for example, there were students that walked out of Mike Pence's commencement speech at Notre Dame. And, you know, you might say, well, they absolutely had the right to do that. They did have the right to do it. Of course, they exercised free speech. That's fine. I don't disagree with necessarily what they did, but it's why they did it. Mm-hmm. And I think they're setting a precedent that if you don't agree with something or you don't like something that someone says, well, you can just stand up, turn your back on them and walk away. That doesn't fly in your job. If your work brings in a speaker that you might not disagree or you might not agree with, you don't get to just walk out and disrespect them. You don't get to do it. And that's what I'm worried about, is that these college students are just going to be overgrown toddlers. And if you have overgrown toddlers as 22-year-olds, you just get toddler adults that can't contribute to society, because part of contributing to society is allowing yourself to be criticized, be offended, and grow from that. Grant touched on this. That's part of growth. Hardship and being offended and being rubbed up against, iron sharpens iron. That's part of growth. That's part of maturing. And I'm just afraid for the maturation of these kids' minds.
Yeah, I think that, again, whenever you think of times in your life in which you almost thank God for them, and when you think, when did I just changed, it doesn't usually come on the highest hill. It is that breakup, that loss of a job. Sometimes it's someone that's doing something to you, but a lot of times also it's self-inflicted things that you're like, I've got to change and I got to do something. And that is where maturity happens.
Let's see if we can also roll in another article, and that's the one on job hopping, because this is a different kind of mindset. The builder generation, those born before the end of World War II, said, you work for General Motors for 30 or 40 years, and then you retire and get the gold watch, and General Motors will take care of you. And there were individuals that literally only had one job their entire life, or two or three, but they were all in the same profession. The numbers that I'm seeing for millennials are off the charts, 20, 30 different jobs over a lifetime in at least 3 or 4 to 5 different kinds of careers. And part of that has to do with the changing economy, but it also has to do a little bit with the expectations of millennials, doesn't it?
Yeah, I was thinking in my mind, so we're breaking records.
Yeah, well, you are.
But in a bad way. Right now, apparently, what I saw recently was millennials are on the trajectory to have 14 jobs by the time they're 40. Mm-hmm. I actually think these do overlap. It is, I don't like it here, so I'm going to go do something else. But the one difference is, I think that a big part of this is, Allie and us talked about this just now, was when our parents grew up, I think they chose their major, their college, their future based mostly off provision, especially our grandparents. I mean, they didn't have much luxury of choosing other than, we're coming out of the Great Depression, we need to provide and put food on the table. And our generation has now the luxury, because of the hard work of generations before providing us a better life, that we have the luxury of choosing also not just provision, but I think we first ask, how do I also accomplish my purpose and exercise my passions? And so to me, it's because young adults haven't really figured that out yet. I do think education used to be easier to choose because you chose it off of numerics. How much money will I make if I get this major and go to this college? And now it's a little less tangible than that. It's like, will this also accomplish my purpose or my passion? But I do think one thing, unfortunately, is we want that passion and purpose to become tangible quicker than it probably will happen. So we leave to a new job we think will provide that.
Right. We want that instant gratification. That's something that millennials really struggle with. Whereas I think our parents, like you said, they picked a college major that they knew would eventually make them money. They picked a job that they knew eventually would make them money. They were okay if they weren't making 6 figures right away. They didn't expect that. They understood that deferred gratification, that, okay, if I pay my dues, if I work hard simply because I'm supposed to work hard, there was really no purpose behind it, then I am going to be able to provide for my family. And they were willing to pay their dues. And I think how they started both college and the real world was probably a lot more humble than millennials. And again, you can kind of go back to how our parents gave us a trophy for everything that we do. But I think there's some statistic that I read, Pew Research asked millennials, how many of you agree with this statement? I believe that I could do anything that I want to accomplish. And it was like 89% of millennials think that. And
but our parents did say that a lot too.
Of course, me too. But I think the problem with that is that so many millennials think that they can accomplish everything they want to accomplish when they are 22 years old. And when they don't, then everyone's out to get them. And everyone else is to blame for that. And our parents understood something different, that it's up to you. And you have to work for that. Yeah.
I tell a lot of parents, either never say that again. Don't constantly say you can be whatever you want to be unless you're willing every time to then follow that up. And you're going to have to work so hard. But I do believe you can do that. And so if you got to add that with that hard work, and it's going to have to be long obedience in the same direction, not just switching. Because I think what we're doing is we're climbing a new ladder thinking we'll get there faster, but we're just like minimally climbing a ladder.
It's like
a whole bunch of ladders. Instead of one sympathy I have with millennials, though, is we did watch our parents take jobs, especially our dads. I think a lot of our generation watched our dads take a job that fully provided, but they did come home exhausted, not exercising their passion,
or they weren't
and losing a type of purpose, and especially that is losing their dad to work. And so I think that's where the tension comes. I don't think we found the solution. I just think that's more the root, and we got to come up with a healthy solution to that.
Yeah, the dads were absent either physically or even if they were there emotionally, and so that was the case. And that survey, that's the Lifeway survey, 89%, And we did the interview a while back on that. And matter of fact, I normally bring that book in. I'll bring it in at the break here because it just shows you that there is this budding optimism. But let's talk about the optimistic part of that, because we've had James Paris on just recently. We've had Chuck Bentley on, and they say this economy provides new opportunities. And Allie Beth, I'll use this as a good example, because you said, I want to do something in the media. And so everybody says, oh, well, then you're going to work for a newspaper. And you go, no, I'm not. I'm going to do an entirely different thing. I'm going to use social media. And look at how, in some respects, you have opportunities that literally did not exist before the internet.
Absolutely.
Yes, it's true. And there's blessings and there are curses to what I call the democratization of the internet. Anyone can be an expert. And that's kind of what I did. I never said I was an expert, but I just said I was a voice, and then people started listening to me. And literally in 11 months from making my first video, I now am in the media. And that's not, as much to do with me as it just has to do with the world that we're living in, that you were rewarded for just putting yourself out there. But there weren't ways to do that when our parents were graduating from college. If you wanted to do something, then like you said, you got an internship at a newspaper, and then maybe 20 years down the line, you might be able to get in front of a camera. Now we have our own cameras. Well, I'm going to be in front of the camera if I want to. So yeah, that's been really cool. And if millennials have that drive and have that ambition, they get to create opportunities on their own that our parents weren't necessarily able to. And that's cool. You've got that entrepreneurial spirit that I think some millennials can latch on to. And that's also the beauty of America, in my personal opinion.
Well, and you hit the, $100,000 number of subscribers?
I wish it was $100,000.
I know, right? I was like, what?
I'm so used to saying money every day, so that's 100,000 subscribers.
So, I think now it's like 120,000 or something like
amazing.
that. But yeah,
Look at that.
It's been really fun.
Well, and again, that, Grant, is an illustration of the opportunities for the entrepreneurial spirit in your generation, isn't it?
Yeah, but, Allie, I was going to bring this up, but now you already have that. What she did is absolutely awesome, but it also feeds something that I think is causing that job hopping. Because one comparison, people like to make fun of how much young adults are on their phone all day. My number one concern with it, because I think if our grandparents had these things, let's not act like they would just not use them and say, oh, no, that's lame. They would use them.
They would be as addicted as anybody else.
So we use them. The number one concern I have with it is not the amount of time on it. It's the amount of comparison that comes from it. Because comparison was limited to the front yard. The keeping up with the Jones was your front yard, maybe your new car. Now comparison is inside the home. I could do video, I probably will, right after this, and show my friends that I'm on here. I could do dinner tonight. I could show my vacation home. Used to not get to see that. So the comparison that was limited has now increased so much. And so that plus the mantra of social media is usually show the best and then hide the rest. You have this constant comparison to a false reality that our generation gets to see. And so when they see her go from last year you were doing this to now you're doing that, I'm going to just quit and go do something new, but it might not happen like it happened for Allie.
Yeah, FOMO, fear of missing out, right? FOMO.
Yes, we do all struggle with that. And I will just say, actually, we're about to take a break, so I'll say it later.
Okay, don't forget what you're going to say. We're going to take a break, and if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net. Or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We will get to some of those phone calls in just a minute. So again, this is our Millennial Round Table. Grant Skeldon with us. Allie Beth Stuckey, she'll have to be heading off in just a little bit to the Blaze, but we still have her, and you were going to share some things, and I know Grant has a few other things to put on the table before we take our first phone call.
Well, we were just talking about how millennials job hop so much and how I kind of jumped into this career hoping it would work, and it kind of has. And I was just thinking for myself, and this is, this is just a weakness of mine. I've been in 3 jobs. This is my 3rd job, and I've only been out of college 3 years this month. And so I am just your typical millennial. If someone would have told me, when I graduated, if someone would have said, you know what, you're going to be in the same job for the rest of your life, I think I would have felt petrified. I mean, the idea of being trapped, I think, is something that millennials really fear, or being put inside a box. And even though I'm going to be in the same industry, hopefully for a long time, if you told me that I was going to do the same thing every day for the rest of my life, I think I would freak out. I wouldn't do it. But for baby boomers, it was just, well, I could work at the same bank for the rest of my life as long as I provide for my family. But I think if you told a millennial that, the first thing they would ask is, well, am I going to be happy? And I'm true. Even as a conservative Christian, I can't imagine not having constant change in my life.
Yeah. Do you think it is the fear of being trapped, or you already listed it, the fear of missing out? Because then you
FOMO.
can't do unknown things that could possibly happen, possibly.
Yeah, maybe so. I just always, I'm opportunistic in a good way. If there's, another opportunity that comes along, I just want the freedom to be able to do what I want. And I'm probably independent to a fault. I don't know if that's my personality or the personality of millennials, but I like the freedom and the flexibility to do my own thing. I don't like being tied to anything. I just want to be me.
Grant, let me come to you for just a minute. One of the people that sits in that chair every once in a while is Greg Laurie when he's been in town. Of course, he's been doing some things, and I know you were with him recently, and there were some great lessons you picked out of that. Yeah,
so I was in California last week. He did a mentoring day with about 27 young leaders, and collectively this group has about 30 million followers on social media. Amazing. And they're all mostly in their young 20s. So these guys...
the future.
It's not that they started when they were like 3 and then built it up. It's that it kind of came out of nowhere.
Yes.
Whether it's their blog, their YouTube channel, their Facebook channel, Twitter, but they have this huge following. So one of his concerns, talking about this, leaving a job to find an opportunity to just maybe gain fame or just a platform, a voice. We all have something I think God's put in our heart to say and show. Some don't get that kind of platform, but his concern was, back when he was growing up, you gained a platform and you gained character that kind of matched that platform. And over the years, you gradually grew. But these guys, young people my age, can gain a platform overnight almost.
Right.
And that character didn't get to, what is it, crock pot? What do they do? Like, it's stews.
Stew.
Slow boil over the years
of
character.
It's more of a microwave.
It is a microwave of character, but an unbelievable amount of platform. So his concern was, how much will this generation maybe disqualify themselves in the future if they don't focus on character and accountability?
And in Hollywood, they so many times talk about people that took 20 years to be an overnight success, because there's a lot of behind the scenes kinds of things.
Good.
And, I remember when I was writing newspaper columns, I'd write one for the Dallas Morning News, the San Jose Mercury or something else, but you would build it slowly. I remember when Cal Thomas began to do more of that, and so I went to radio because I started thinking, there are not a lot of people going to be reading newspapers, but I know a lot of people are going to be listening to radio and doing social media, which I think was a good deal. But again, as we just used with Allie Beth as a good example, that's just one of many in which individuals can overnight have a national platform. I've seen some evangelists that we've talked about, even interviewed on this program, that almost overnight have a national platform, which was really different than kind of the slow platform that Greg Laurie or Billy Graham had. So it's something to think about, and certainly a word to the wise out there if they're really concerned about some of these issues.
Yeah.
Let me take a phone call because as we go along, I like to hear from some of our listeners. So we'll go to the state of Texas. Patty, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
You're welcome. I can certainly relate to the lady who said he's independent to a fault and wants to do. I think we're fixers. I really do, and I think that we need more funding. In fact, I think mothers in general throughout time have been totally underfunded. So, and so has God. You know, God was the original one to give charity here. He gave us life and a planet. He even sent Paul to say, have faith, hope, and charity. Charity is the greatest of these. So,
you were also going to say something about decision-making, too, weren't you?
I did. I wanted to say something about decision-making. I think the millennials are tired of some of the decisions and have seen the results of many of the decisions that we see rampant in our world today. Our food is adulterated, our air, water. And I'm not saying that they're not making decisions to better those things, but I am saying we need to have some sense of respect for our earth and what God did provide for us.
Sure. You know, I was just thinking about decision-making because I thought one idea is that your generation is facing more decisions than any generation in history because of more opportunities. And there was an individual we've had on this program, Dr. Richard Swenson, that figured out that from the time you're born to about 18, you have to basically learn about 20,000 different devices. This could be an electric can opener. It's how to turn on your TV. It's how to program your DVR. It's how to drive a car, all those kinds of things. And then when you go out into the world, because we have such a successful economy, you've got lots of choices. Just go down the cereal aisle. You know exactly what I'm talking about there. Go into an electronics store. And theology is as choice increases, commitment decreases. The more choices I have, the less committed I am. Is that possible, Allie Beth? Another reason why job hopping and maybe dissatisfaction because I'm never sure I made the right choice?
Yeah, absolutely. You made a really good point that because we have so many options, it's hard for us to actually figure out what we want to do. And then once we get into something, well, we still have all of those options that are out there. So if the slightest bit of discontentment creeps into our minds when we're in our first job, well, we're already looking for our next job. And especially if our goal is happiness and the first job doesn't make us happy, then we need to keep searching for that thing that actually makes us happy. But yeah, I absolutely think that's something that plagues millennials, that we have to not just choose between right and wrong or good and bad, like maybe previous generations did, but we have to choose between good and best. And for a Christian, okay, I think it's might be a little bit easier because you have that discernment, one, to choose between right and wrong, but then choosing between good and best, the Holy Spirit helps that, I think. Good. But if you don't have that one moral compass, and if you don't have the Holy Spirit guiding you, I don't know how you choose between good and best, which is why I think we see so many millennials job hopping. That's why you see so much divorce among younger generations is because we don't have that discernment between good and best.
Any thoughts?
I think that we need discipleship badly. I heard it said that we all learn from mistakes, but no one said you have to learn from your own mistakes. And that's what I actually appreciated about the mentorship that day with Greg Laurie, which, by the way, Harvest America announced last week. It is coming back to Dallas in 2018.
Of course, they're doing Phoenix coming up here, so there's some really good ones. They've done Atlanta, some of the places where we broadcast. Go ahead.
What he shared, and we got to do the same day with Lee Strobel, is they shared on failures. And I love when a leader that you just only see the successes usually from share their failures, because we usually do see people's highlight reels. Yeah. When you see those failures, you feel like, oh, that's a necessary part of the process.
It sure is.
It's Joseph didn't become the second in command right away. He went through a couple not safe spaces, and so did David. And so that it is the part of the process is that piece. And so I just think that our generation doesn't need to be saved from the Savior. We need those times in which we kind of hit rock bottom a little bit. But I do think the options make it harder. I remember when Spotify came out. Believe it or not, I'm talking like an old person now.
Back in my day, there was only iTunes.
Yeah, well, no, I didn't do iTunes because even that. But you had to buy a CD with around 12 songs just to get your 2 to 3 songs that you actually cared about.
Yeah.
And I remember when Spotify came out, I was like, this solves so many of my problems because I love music. But I have found now, years into having Spotify access to any song I want other than Taylor Swift, is that because she don't put her music on Spotify.
Yeah, right.
I sometimes listen and I'm like, what do I want to listen to? There's no good music anymore. Like, and it's not that there's not more good music. I just have I have access to so much. So sometimes more options can actually devalue and you're not grateful for what you have as much.
If I could recommend two books, one, Dr. Erwin Lutzer, Failure Backdoor to Success, which is a great book, and it's an older book. And then, of course, when you were talking about Overchoice, there's a book called Overchoice by Richard Swenson, who we were talking about as well. But we need to say goodbye to the conservative millennial, and you can go to theconservativemillennialblog.com, or you don't have to remember all those words, because just click on the See More next to the picture of Allie Beth, and that will be the case. So I know you're heading over to the Blaze, and we can watch you over there, can't we?
Yes, thank you so much.
When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Grant Skeldon, talk about how to disciple millennials. All that coming up right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. On past episodes, we have discussed RLUIPA, the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act. It's the law with a funny name that protects both the way in which religious organizations use their property and the free exercise of religion by prisoners during their incarceration. Soon after President Clinton signed the law in 1999, several inmates employed RLUIPA to challenge the failure of the correction system to accommodate the religious practices of inmates from non-mainstream religions. On appeal to the United States Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit, RLUIPA was invalidated as a violation of the Constitution. The Sixth Circuit reasoned that RLUIPA impermissibly advances religion by giving greater protection to religious rights than to other constitutionally protected rights, and by doing so, the statute might just encourage prisoners to become religious in order to enjoy greater rights. The Supreme Court of the United States unanimously reversed that decision. Writing for the court in Cutter v. Wilkinson, Justice Ginsburg explained that RLUIPA fits within the corridor of the religion clauses of the First Amendment, and that it rightly alleviates exceptional government-created burdens on private religious exercise. These government-created burdens on religious liberty are the right targets for congressional action. Whether a prisoner seeking to exercise his faith or a religious organization being unjustly run out of town by a county commission, RLUIPA strengthens our national commitment to religious liberty. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back again, and it is our Millennial Round Table. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. As we said, Allie Beth Stuckey had to take off, and she will be over there at the Blaze. Grant Skeldon still in studio, and I might just mention, in just a minute, we're going to talk about the Initiative Network, and I really want to, again, challenge some of you to consider to do the same thing that Grant and his staff have done here, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But one of the articles we've posted, actually, it's a video, How to Disciple Millennials. And Grant, if there is misconception, even during that, you show a little video where the guy's saying, well, you got to have a coffee house, and you got to have a beer, and you got to, that's not what it's all about.
No.
But we have listeners, and I've had pastors say, I really appreciate your Millennial Roundtable because it's helping me understand what I really need to say and do and how I need to be in order to connect up with your generation. Talk about that if you might.
Yeah. I think the irony is a lot of generations before my generation think that they have to be, let's say, cool or relevant in order to disciple young people or even influence young people. But I really think all they need to be is unbelievably authentic. Confidently authentic. Yeah. I think Bob Goff is a great testimony to that. Bob Goff wrote Love Does, which is a 56-year-old man writes a book about love and how it acts. It's not appreciation of God, it responds to God as love. And his main market is 20-somethings. Yes. I drove to Abilene with a 3-hour warning saying he's going to be on Twitter. I saw he's going to be there. Me and my friends got in a car and went to go listen to him. And I think what makes this man, is he got ripped jeans? Does he have tattoos? Is he really cool? No, he's just really authentic, and he just lives every day. Right. Like, what would Jesus do today?
Mm-hmm. And so, again, what we're talking about here is authenticity. We already mentioned this idea of failure. That's something that, if I can represent what I sometimes heard in some seminaries, is one is you don't want to really talk too much about your failures. Number two, you don't want to play favorites among the congregation. And the signals it sends are, number one, on the first point, is that I'm a super Christian and I never make a mistake, and you can't really get close to me because I'm perfect. And number two, then I notice that you don't have any friends, so friendship must be optional and accountability must be optional. Mm-hmm. And those are two things that just could bring about the death of a ministry, couldn't they?
Yeah. John Maxwell has a quote where he said, if you want to impress people, share your successes. If you want to impact people, share your failures. Mm-hmm. And so I think that I found one of the barriers to discipleship for Xers and boomers is that mentality of don't show your weaknesses. Yeah. But it's what young adults are actually desperate to see. I see this a lot with, ironically, Christian moms. Yes. I'll tell them, like, there's young girls that would love to learn how to be a good wife and mother like you are. And they'll say, but I can't have them come into my home and see how dirty this house is. And what about next week? I'll get the house cleaner. And what they don't realize is the moms that tend to disciple really well are the moms that are like, my house is a mess, but this is real life. Like the house is not always perfect, but this is real life. Mm-hmm. And we're gonna work through this. And so young girls just absolutely love to see that. And so I'm looking for same thing for men that are willing to show their scars, because there's a lot of young guys my age that talk about their dads, and I've noticed this pattern. No matter what the different ethnicity or background or socioeconomic class they were in, one consistent pattern I found around my parents' generation is that they didn't, especially the men, didn't show them like cry in public or among even their kids. And so what that can do, even though we knew that they were encountering hard times, they always retreat, which is ironic because it kind of goes back to the safe spaces. Is like. I think, again, if weakness is where God's strength shows up, it's literally in the Bible. And so we shouldn't run from our weaknesses. Jesus himself weeps. And so that authenticity is what our generation is looking for. One thing I do want to share, this misconception of discipleship, though, I think we look at discipleship mostly as information transfer. Right. I'll teach you this. Once you memorize it, then you've been discipled. But the reality is that's not what Jesus did. And so how I break it down is I think that mentorship is come and meet with me. That's what most of us think of as discipleship. Let's meet once a week and I'll teach you something or I'll ask about your life, and it's kind of like counseling. That's good, but mentorship is meet with me. Discipleship is follow me. That means you need to follow my work life, my church life, at home, which could be a little different of how you have to put on a different hat with your kids than you do with your employees. And so you get to, if discipleship is caught and not taught, that leads to absolute transformation. But if mentorship is meet with me and discipleship is follow me, unfortunately, I think what we're doing as Christians, and especially in the church, it's come and listen to me.
Come and listen to me.
And that's not discipleship. That's good. You can learn.
It's teaching. That's what it is, but it's not discipleship. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's also not entrusting various biblical principles to then teach others also. So there's another principle there of replication and transformation. Just before we run out of time, let's talk about the Initiative Network. Again, it's initiativenetwork.org. We have the link there, but I want to, and we've said this before when we've had you on this program, see what we can do to have some of these spring up in other communities, because we are all over the nation here, and I hope some other young millennials would say, this is exactly what we need in our community. And how could they get started? Can you give us some ideas?
Yeah, I would say emailing Michael on our website or myself. We are starting to look at replication, possibly in Fort Worth, if any listeners are out there. Church leaders, business leaders, young leaders. It's actually not just young adults. We need a collective of the leaders in that community. And I'm actually going in 2 weeks to Memphis to speak at a church called Hope Church. And I'll connect with some business leaders and young leaders because we're looking at, will this be good soil to start another initiative network of local missionaries in the culture for Christ.
Let's talk about 72 for just a minute, because on your piece here it says seminary trains pastors for the church, and I'm all about teaching seminary. I've taught in the seminaries and will probably continue to do so, but you say 72 trains missionaries for the city.
Yeah.
So talk about that, because that's another outreach that you've had that I hope would be replicated around the country.
Yeah. This doesn't happen at every church, but I found a lot of churches, when I was a senior in high school, I felt called to ministry. I went to a seminary, and you know what they did for me was they brought me to the front in front of the whole church on a Sunday, and they prayed over us, and they commissioned us.
Right.
You know who they didn't do that for? Literally anyone else that didn't feel called to be a pastor.
Yeah.
But they would say that we're all doing ministry,
right? But
they act like that's the realest form of ministry.
Yeah.
And what that has done is caused, let's say if you wanted to be a doctor or a lawyer or a business leader, you kind of feel like the B team. And the reality is a lot of leaders, like what you're doing and I'm doing, I'm not a pastor. But the irony is the people that aren't in vocational ministry are rubbing shoulders with way more non-Christians than pastors.
And opening doors that pastors will never walk through.
Absolutely.
Right.
And so it's a shame if we don't train them for mission work and value them and highlight them. We don't rarely tell their story about how they're in the community doing business for Christ. And so I think we really got to change that, because we might find we may lose a lot less millennials if we expand the kingdom of God, because God's already there. We got to start affirming and highlighting, and even I would say train leaders to go out. And that means bringing in Christian business leaders into the church to share what does it look like to be a business Christian man or a Christian artist and Christian politician, because the Lord knows we need more of those.
Yeah, we certainly do. Again, Grant Skeldon with us, and let me just again mention initiativenetwork.org.
Yeah.
And you're really good about responding to emails, so there is a contact point that they can use. And I would just, again, share the vision that you and I have. That is to get more of these types of programs out. You'll be in Memphis, so our listeners in Tennessee, if they want to come and hear you, they can find that on the schedule there as well, can't they?
Yes.
And again, we'll see you at all sorts of events, whether it's Movement Day, whether it's Greg Glory, or a variety of others. And always great to have you in studio. So thank you for being with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kerby.
We're going to take a break, and when we'll get back into the news, because we did have a very significant tragedy that took place in Manchester, England. We have, of course, the President Trump making his way now from the Middle East to the Vatican and some other places. And, of course, we have a couple of issues here at home to address. So we'll talk about that in the second hour. All that coming up right after these messages.
When I heard Point of View explain about secular humanism, it drove us to really begin a school.
More than 30 years ago, Rodney Hare heard about a pressing need for the children of his community, and he took action, starting Liberty Christian School, that today provides excellence in academics and spiritual life to nearly 1,300 students and their families. Rodney knows without Point of View, that legacy would not exist.
Without those of us that are able to really help substantially in giving sacrificially, Point of View will never be as strong as it could be. We cannot let anything happen to Point of View Radio.
Giving sacrificially means something different to each of us, but each of us can do something. Discover what you can do at pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. Please don't put it off. Take that step now and join the Truth Team. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. First hour, we had our Millennial Round Table, and then they had to head off to some of their activities, so we will continue looking at some of the issues in the news. I might just mention that next week, when we have our Millennial Round Table, we're going to look at a lot of those facts and figures and statistics related to millennials, and some of them are traveling, so we will have Steve Cable in studio with us, and we'll be looking at that and really answering some of the questions people have of really how many millennials are leaving the church, what's happening to them, what about the so-called nuns, those that say none of the above, those kinds of issues. Those are going to be some topics we will address next week. Might just mention Friday we'll have our standard weekend edition roundtable. That'll be Penna Dexter and Kelly Shackelford. But if you'd like to join our conversation in this second hour, we'll open up the phones again, 1-800-351-1212. Before we get into some issues in the news, one of the things we have been promoting over the last couple of days has been this movie that we had a chance to see last night. It is done by CBN, called In Our Hands, The Battle for Jerusalem. Don't know how many of you had a chance to see it, but if you'd like to join our conversation, I'd love to hear your comments, because we're coming up to the 50th anniversary of the 1967 Six-Day War. They chose last night, which would be May 23rd, as a very important remembrance time for this, but June 5th will be that, and as a matter of fact, next week we will have in studio with us Gary Frazier, who has written a lot about how God's hand has moved in the nation of Israel. In the future, hoping to have David Brogg back on the program. He is the author of this book, Reclaiming Israel's History, Roots, Right, and the Struggle for Peace. But last night we had a chance to watch not only this reenactment of this incredible battle in 1967, Six-Day War, where indeed Israel was outmanned and outgunned and yet was successful. And not only was it able to survive, but it actually moved into Jerusalem, took the old city, and occupied the Golan Heights, Sinai, and other things. And so again, it was a film. Took about a year to complete. My commentary on Monday talks about that, and Gordon Robertson with CBN was in studio with us recently to talk about this. And again, one of the more memorable scenes, which I mentioned in my commentary, is where this woman gives a flag to the battalion commander and explains she brought the flag to him because it once flew in the old city in 1948. She wanted him to hang the flag on the city again, and that was one of the more significant elements in the film. So if you had a chance to see it, love to hear your comments and thoughts about that. We're going to spend some time next week as we get closer to this 50th anniversary talking about what has happened in Israel. And of course, we've just had the President of the United States go to Israel and actually go to the Wailing Wall, first president, I believe, to actually have done that. He, of course, has now gone to the Vatican. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. But I thought I'd spend just a few minutes, if I could, on what has been taking place in Manchester. Bomber yesterday, and who he was, who killed at that time. And of course, you've had a number that are injured. Police now have made 3 arrests and searched an address in central Manchester in what Police Chief Ian Hopkins describes as a fast-moving investigation. He said, "I think it's very clear that this is a network that we are investigating." And so we'll talk about some of that in just a minute. Also went on to say, as I've said, it continues at a pace. There's extensive investigations going on and activity taking place across greater Manchester as we speak. Earlier in the day, we had the Interior Minister, Amber Rudd, say that the bomber had recently returned from Libya, and her French counterpart said that he had links with the Islamic State and had probably visited Syria as well. Rudd, by the way, scolded U.S. officials for leaking details about the investigation into the Manchester attack before British officials were prepared to go public. So we see a little bit of a tiff involving that, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later if you want. It, of course, raises concerns all across Europe right now, including in such cities as Paris and Nice and Brussels and St. Petersburg and Berlin and London, which have all suffered some kind of militant attack in the past. And this individual, 22 years of age, blew himself up on Monday outside of that venue. Monday night or Sunday night, however you want to actually write it out. And this, of course, was tied into the Ariana Grande conference and concert. So, again, this is very significant, and especially when we look at what is happening in England right now. Rudd said that they may deploy up to 3,800 soldiers into the streets of Britain, taking on guard duties to free up police to focus on patrols and investigation. And so there is a little bit of a concern about whether or not there would be, if you will, another shoe to drop. So that is just a little bit of an update on the Manchester bombing. And I thought I'd give you a couple of commentaries just before we go to our break. And the first comes from our friend Gary Bauer. He said, once again, these thugs have brought terror and sorrow to our civilization. This time, the target was the 21,000 people attending the Ariana Grande concert in Manchester, England. One of the first victims, he points out, is this 8-year-old, and of course the death toll at that time was 22, with an additional 59 hospitalized. But again, we see that the bomber said his inspiration was Islamic thought, Muslim thought, if you will, that is radical Muslim thought. His victims, according to ISIS statements, were crusaders who deserved to die. And yet this was done, I think, in large part to just really hurt our sensibilities. It's one thing to kill anybody, but to kill basically a room full of girls, because a lot of these were young girls coming to hear Ariana Grande sing and perform. And either it was these girls or their parents, in most cases, that were possibly the targets. He was known, as some people said, as a known wolf. We've heard the lone wolf. Well, we are starting to use the phrase known wolf because he is somebody that was known by the British authorities. We now know a little bit more about the possibility of a network. We know a little bit more about the possibility that he traveled to Syria and other places. And so, again, we know that this is something that is of great concern to the fact that we in the UK right now have, according to the authorities, I'm using their numbers, 3,500 so-called known wolves. Just imagine if you know 3,500 people in a country the size of England who are potentially suicide bombers like this individual, or potential individuals that could drive a truck or blow themselves up or blow you up or leave a bomb. This, again, that many of these countries, European nation, faces similar threats. He says Belgium, with a population of only 12 million, is the center of some of this concern, and they're tracking 18,000 of these individuals. And so he points out again what has really been taking place in these particular areas of carnage. And he also says that commentators are suggesting that this is a new low for the jihadists. It isn't in Russia, for example. In the 2004 Chechen, the Islamists seized a school, taking more than 1,000 people hostage, including 700 plus children. And after a 3-day siege, 330 were killed, including 186 children. So we can see that sometimes the soft targets that are being picked are indeed children. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll talk about what has been happening in Europe and a few things happening here in the United States. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
In an important case involving religious liberty, a Kentucky court ruled that a print shop does not have to make gay pride t-shirts. The dispute arose a number of years ago when the Gay and Lesbian Services Organization asked Hands On Original to make t-shirts with the name and logo of the Pride Festival. Blaine Adamson said he refused to print the shirts because it violated his business policy of not printing messages that endorse a position in conflict with his convictions. Although he referred the homosexual group to another printing company to fulfill the order, the LGBT advocates filed the complaint with the County Human Rights Commission. The commission argued that he was discriminating against the homosexual group. Now, Mr. Adamson offered examples of other orders he refused. These included one that used an offensive word and another one that was a depiction of Jesus dressed as a pirate. It's also worth mentioning that he regularly does business with the LGBT community and even employs homosexuals. This appeals court ruling is encouraging. We wouldn't demand that a print shop owned by a vegetarian should be forced to print flyers for a cattlemen's association. We shouldn't force a print shop owned by an African American to print posters for a white supremacist group. But we rarely hear about such conflicts for two reasons. First, if a print shop declined to print something, the customer would merely go to another shop and not bother to file a complaint. Second, most customers would probably avoid a print shop that might object to their message. That is the difference. In many of these cases, LGBT members specifically target Christian printers, bakers, florists, and photographers in order to create a problem and then report it to the local or state human rights organization. I'm encouraged that common sense is broken out, at least in one court in this country. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join a conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let me come back before I take a phone call, some of the comments, and one of those that you've heard is, well, this is a new low by attacking children. And Gary Bauer took some time to really remind us that, no, this unfortunately is modus operandi. That is, he said, commentators are suggesting this is a new low for the jihadists. And as I pointed out just a minute ago, you can talk about what happened in Russia. In Beslan, Russia, you had the Chechen Islamists, in this particular case, taking a school. More than 1,000 people were taken hostage, including 777 children. And as I mentioned, after a 3-day siege, 330 people were killed, and that was 186 children. And I might just mention that many of those children were also sexually assaulted. So that is one example. Let's go to another part of the world. Let's go to Nigeria. We've talked in the past about Boko Haram in Nigeria. It took hundreds of Christian girls hostage back in 2014. They were forced to convert to Islam or else die. They were passed out to the various Haram whatever you want to call them. They call themselves warriors, but the militants to use as they desired. You can imagine what that was involved. And you might remember there was a social media campaign that the First Lady had. It was hashtag Bring Back Our Girls. Boko Haram didn't seem very impressed, though, and we've talked about that one. And then let's take one more just to illustrate the point, and that is in our last war with Hamas in Gaza. We saw that Hamas dug scores of tunnels into Israel to allow all sorts of jihadists to surface in the civilian neighborhoods. And one of those tunnels opened into an Israeli kindergarten. And the plan was for them to massacre the children or else take them all hostage and bring them back to Gaza. So you can see that we certainly have that case. And even in September 11th, the mastermind of September 11th, the attack here in the United States, came from Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. And when he was asked by U.S. interrogators how he could justify the intentional killing of women and even children, he cited his understanding of the Quran as his reason. He said he wanted to kill little infidel boys so they wouldn't grow up to be soldiers. He wanted to kill little girls before they could bring more crusader babies into the world. So when we see these kinds of attacks against girls in the UK at an Ariana Grande concert, we have to recognize that that's sometimes the mode at which they actually work to bring terror into our world. And before we move on to some other topics, and again, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. I thought I would read from Jim Dennison. We've had, of course, Nick Pitts with us so often on our Millennial Round Table. And, of course, his boss is Jim Dennison, who's been on the program with us many times before. But the commentary that he posted today is, did the Manchester attacker represent Islam? And he points out that in yesterday's daily article, which we oftentimes promote, he said, I stated that the attacker does not represent Islam and that radicalized Muslims are a small minority of the larger Muslim world. He said, I noted that they have killed many more Muslims than non-Muslims. And if you listen to the speech that we talked about yesterday by President Donald Trump, he cites one statistic where maybe 95% of the individuals killed by Muslim radicals are other Muslims. And so, again, he quoted a Muslim authority who condemned the attack in Manchester. Okay, so far so good. Well, this is why Jim Dennison wrote this today. He said, some readers question my position, claiming that Islam is a religion of violence and it attacks such as the atrocity in England expresses its ideology. And he says, this is a common and urgent question. There are 1.6 billion Muslims in the world. Clearly, we need to know if each of them represents a threat to the rest of us. And so Jim Dennison says, I've been studying Islam since serving as a missionary to the Muslim world while in college. As a matter of fact, we have interviewed Jim Dennison on his book. And he said, I've written a book and numerous articles on radical Islam and taught world religions with 4 different seminaries. And he says, in my experience, the relationship between violence and Islam is a complicated one that cannot be explained fully in an essay as brief as this daily article. He says, I've written a paper on this issue titled Islam, a Religion of Violence or Peace, and he says you can read it here. So, again, we can provide the link if you'd like to find it, but it's real easy. Simply just go to the DennisonForum.org, and you'll find the link there as well. And he points out something that we've talked about on this program before, but I'd like to get into it again. And that is the Quran was given to Muhammad in 2 phases. The first, from AD 610 to 622, was received while he lived in Mecca, and it's known as the Meccan phase of the Quran. It contains 124 commands for Muslims to tolerate those who do not share their faith, with statements such as, let there be no compulsion in religion. And that's found in Surah 2, verse 256. Or to be your way or to be mine, and that's in Quran and in Surah 109. But then he points out that there was a second phase that came when he lived in Medina, and that takes place from AD 622 to AD 632, and it is known as the Medina phase. It requires Muslims to defend the Quran. It calls for them to fight and slay pagans wherever you find them, and that's the so-called kind of the famous verse of the sword. It's in Quran, Surah 9, verse 5. And this is what is used most of the time to justify the actions of radical Muslim terrorists. Well, let me go back to Jim Dennison there. He says some Muslims follow the doctrine of abrogation, claiming that the revelations in Medina requiring violence supersede or abrogate those of Mecca, teaching on tolerance. Others believe that each verse of the Quran must be accepted as equal in authority. Still others teach that the Medina verses were necessary for establishing Islam but are not authoritative today. And so I think he's done a good job of helping us understand that you really almost like you have in the Bible. You have an Old Testament and a New Testament. You have the verses from Mecca, then you have the verses from Medina. But if you accept this idea of abrogation, that these later verses, which call for the verses of the sword to go and to kill the infidels and to subjugate the world, if you believe that those were important in that day and important in this day, in other words, they're universally binding today, then you're probably going to be a radical Muslim, and you're probably going to end up in a terrorist network. If, however, you believe that those were necessary for the establishment of Islam in those days, or they were important to Muhammad in those days, but not necessarily normative today, then you can see that those are people probably in your neighborhood, individuals you've met on college campuses who don't necessarily represent a threat. So let me go back to Jim Dennison's piece, and then we'll open up for some of your comments or questions. Because Jim Dennison says, according to Gallup, only 7% of the Muslim world can be considered radical or militant jihadist. This does not mean that 7 out of every 100 Muslims in America are radicalized. The percentage, as he says, would be much higher in Egypt or Saudi Arabia and much lower in Morocco or the United States. But he still says that's a frightening number. Of course, 7% of 1.6 billion Muslims is 112 million jihadists. But it is not equivalent to the larger Muslim world. He says it's difficult to claim that militant Islamists represent all Muslims when they are killing vast numbers of their fellow Muslims. We should also note that the Gallup report that tips from the Muslim American community are the largest single source of initial information to authorities about terrorist plots. It is tragically true, he says, that radical Islamists can cite significant portions of the Quran in defense of their atrocities, but it is also true that many Muslim leaders have publicly rejected their theology and their crimes. So finally, he says, how should we respond? He says, as I explained in my paper, which again is available at the DennisonForum.org, or we can post it here at pointofview.net if you'd like, we should cooperate with Mecca Muslims to defeat the radical ideology of Medina Muslims. We should work tirelessly to defend ourselves from jihadists who would commit further acts of terror against us, and we should pray daily for the spiritual awakening to sweep the Muslim world. Scripture says of Jesus, there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. Acts 4:12. Have you prayed for Muslims to meet Jesus today? So again, that's just a piece by Jim Dennison, and if you'd like to ask some questions or make some comments about this, once again, while we look at what took place in Manchester, England, and when we look at other potential threats that they are looking at in possible other cities in Europe, and perhaps even eventually in this country, we should begin to think clearly about this issue of Islam. And so this is one of the reasons why he took the time to explain why the Manchester attacker doesn't represent all of Islam, but even if you take that number of 7%, which I think is probably a low percentage, but even if you take that, it still means 112 million jihadists around the world. This is why we need to be ever vigilant, and if you'd like to join the conversation, love to hear your comments. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net. or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Last half hour, kind of an open line. Let me just mention that tomorrow on our Thursday program, we're going to have one guest in studio, one by phone in the second hour. And that will be Kathy Gray will be in studio. Lisa Thomas will be by phone. And we'll be talking about this issue of abortion again in, I think, a very significant way. Their book, Light in Our Darkness, was interesting because they were doing a program, and it was kind of a weekly show, and they were spending some time just interviewing people. One of the people that they interviewed, and this goes back a number of years, is Dr. Bernard Nathanson, who we've had on the program many, many years ago, and he was one of the founding members of NARAL, which is the National Association for the Repeal of Abortion Laws. And they began to, if nothing else, start thinking a little bit about the whole issue of abortion. And when they began to hear the stories that he was sharing, and after you're talking about an individual that after residing over 75,000 abortions and seeing the new sonogram machine, Dr. Nathanson began to see things in a different light. And so he began to share how he made changed in his view. He accepted Jesus Christ, all sorts of other things. And the ladies, and I'll let them tell the story tomorrow, had an on-air epiphany, and all else, but they realized that they'd really kind of bought every one of the lies that they had heard, and they were like, oh my goodness. And so they were going to tell this story, but also, again, I think it will be an encouragement to you to see how, again, facts and stories and testimonies and illustrations sometimes can have such a powerful impact in some of the social issues that we address in our day. So again, that will be one of the things we'll be talking about on Thursday. We'll also get back into a couple of the other issues in the news. And as President Trump kind of winds down his trip that has taken him really to the capitals of major places that are the home of all sorts of different various religions of the world, we'll certainly see what he's going to come back to in terms of some of the debates that will be taking place on various issues ranging from tax cuts to the repeal and replace of the Affordable Care Act and much, much more. So we'll get into some of those issues. And if you'd like to join us today as we talk about Islam, again, that's another topic we'll put on the table, and we'll get into that in just a minute. But let me real quickly, before we take some of the phone calls, spend some time talking about another issue that we've been researching. If you get our Outlook magazine, the most recent one on pornography, the one on that before that had to do with the protection of conscience. One that we've been working on has to do with this issue of a divided nation. And there's a lot of evidence to support that, and that is the Gallup polls, for example, that have been taken show that about 3/4 of Americans, 77%, think that the United States is divided. Another 21% believe that it's united. Now, there have been some that have said this is a higher percentage than ever, because, again, everything has to be blamed on President Trump. But if you go back and look at the numbers, which I did, really, we've been kind of at an average percentage of about 67%. So this is higher, but 2 years ago it was already 69%. And I might just point out, there's only been one time in the last 2 decades where that's dropped down precipitously, and that was in 2002. This happened, of course, right after the September 11th attacks in 2001, and this is one of the few times where it jumped. There's nothing like an attack on America to bring us together, and that's where you actually had almost 3/4 or 74% who felt that the country was united, but it went right back to the numbers we've seen before. So the argument is that we have a divided nation, and the argument has been, well, we've seen this before, even before the election of President Trump. I mean, after all, you had progressives talking about us versus them, the us being Democrats and various leftist groups, the them being, businesses, corporations, people and traditional values. Even you've had the president himself, the previous president, President Obama, talking about we won, get over it. And you've had, all sorts of conflict already. And this isn't necessarily new, because what we're talking about here, obviously, is the fact that we have had conflicts really since the beginning of this country. We've had the Federalist Party, we've had the Democratic Republican Party, later we had the Whig Party, we have the Republican Party, which would be the modern part. You had the Civil War, which is a war between the northern states and the southern states. We've even had conflicts between farmers and ranchers. between members of Congress representing rural cities and urban cities and rural areas and things of that nature. But what we are starting to find is that there are some real divisions. But at the same time, I want to, in just a minute, quote from one very good article by Dirk Phillipson, who actually says that we may be more united than we think we are. And what he does is he says that the reason we have what seems to be so much division is due to what he calls tribalism. And that is, he is a professor at Duke, I might mention, and he lives in what's called the North Carolina Research Triangle. Well, that's the home of the Duke-UNC rivalry. And if you've ever seen that, he and many others will say that their favorite teams are Duke and anyone playing the University of North Carolina. And so, you have this rivalry that takes place, and we can certainly see that as the case. But at the same time, he points out that really you could fill a room with Tea Party members, Wall Street activists, concerned Christians, and others, and you'd find that if you told them just to talk about their values and goals without reference to political labels and catchwords, you'd find there's a lot of agreement. For example, one study found that 9 out of 10 Americans, independent of party affiliations, would actually prefer radically less inequality. Half feel that corporations have too much influence. None of them want their tax dollars wasted, and only 19% actually trust their government. So it's a reminder that sometimes it's this, if you will, tribalism that divides us. And if there's nothing else, there's just a real need to recognize there's a lot more that unites us than divides us. But let's, if we can, give you an opportunity to hear from one of our guests who oftentimes is one of our roundtable guests, and it's Dr. Nick Pitts. Hey, thank you for calling today, buddy.
Hey, first-time caller, long-time listener. How are you guys?
I don't believe a word of it. I look up there and I go, Nick Pitts. We just said goodbye to Allie Beth and Grant Skeldon, and I thought, well, we'll just kind of postpone the rest of our millennial discussion till you get back. What part of the country are you in right now?
I'm in good old Washington, D.C. right now.
Yes, I know you're heading out of the country pretty soon, but aren't you teaching right now? What's going on?
Yeah, so I am in the shadow of the Capitol right now. Had a bit of free time, so I thought I'd tune in for a little bit, and loved what you were talking about. So I thought I'd call in and see what you're up to.
Well, again, one of the things I was just talking about a minute ago, which maybe you can appreciate, is that when we always follow political labels, we have this tribalism. That's fine for basketball or football. You might love University of Tennessee and not necessarily like Memphis or something like that. But that's very different than the fact that when you look at some of these statistics, as Dirk Phillipson is talking about, we, on a lot of issues as Americans, are much more united than we are divided, aren't we?
I couldn't agree more. I think Jonathan Haidt, in his book, The Righteous Divide, speaks quite a bit to this, that we're just tribal people by nature. But I think if you look at the American experiment, just relative to just recently, what we've seen is we've just become much more political by nature, and that's almost becoming our first identity. And inevitably, not only is the political identity becoming the first nature, but we don't have those intermediary institutions that are really bringing us together anymore.
Yes,
that we've kind of disengaged from these civic organizations where individuals used to be able to kind of mingle one with another. Robert Putnam talks about this a lot in his newest book, Our Kids, where there's our kids and their kids, and contingent upon upward social mobility is the capacity for individuals to be able to intermingle with one another, whether that's in schools, whether that's in the local league, whether that's in the local basketball leagues, that there's just not that intermingling that's happening between classes that really is creating an us versus them, our kids, their kids dichotomy that's really just unfortunate on a variety of levels.
And one of the things I say at the end of one of the things I've written is that, this is what's known as externalization. We blame the other guy. We hunker down in our own positions. We divide into groups as us versus them. We end up building walls instead of barriers. And what he called it's the old game being played out before our very eyes. So it seems to me that one of the things we're going to have to decide, and we'll come to a break here and talk more about that with you and a couple of callers in just a minute, is if we're going to continue to participate in this tribal game, or whether we want to maybe reject the forces that are trying to divide us and start finding some of these common sense solutions. So, Nick, stay with us because I have, as you will know, one of those mandatory breaks coming up, quarter to the hour. Keep you on for a little bit longer, and then I'll take some phone calls. But this is an opportunity, as we talked about in the first hour, to focus on some of the millennial issues. And we've also spent some time talking about what has happened in Manchester, England. And I see some callers want to address the issue of Islam. Matter of fact, I might mention, I quoted from your buddy Jim Dennison, did the Manchester attacker represent Islam? So we'll come back and continue our conversation, take some phone calls. All that coming up right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. On past episodes, we have discussed RLUIPA, the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act. It's the law with a funny name that protects both the way in which religious organizations use their property and the free exercise of religion by prisoners during their incarceration. Soon after President Clinton signed the law in 1999, several inmates employed RLUIPA to challenge the failure of the correction system to accommodate the religious practices of inmates from non-mainstream religions. On appeal to the United States Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit, RLUIPA was invalidated as a violation of the Constitution. The Sixth Circuit reasoned that RLUIPA impermissibly advances religion by giving greater protection to religious rights than to other constitutionally protected rights, and by doing so, the statute might just encourage prisoners to become religious in order to enjoy greater rights. The Supreme Court of the United States unanimously reversed that decision. Writing for the court in Cutter v. Wilkinson, Justice Ginsburg explained that RLUIPA fits within the corridor of the religion clauses of the First Amendment, and that it rightly alleviates exceptional government-created burdens on private religious exercise. These government-created burdens on religious liberty are the right targets for congressional action. Whether a prisoner seeking to exercise his faith or a religious organization being unjustly run out of town by a county commission, RLUIPA strengthens our national commitment to religious liberty. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Time for a few more minutes. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Nick Pitts probably had to go. I know he was teaching, so I appreciate hearing from him from Washington, D.C. Let's go back to the phones. In California, Louis, thank you for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be on. Thank you very much.
Well, what's your comment or question? You have the floor.
I actually spent at various times. I'm a retired Navy chaplain, and I spend from 6 months to 4 months at times in Jerusalem and also in the Middle East a bit. But in regards to Jerusalem, I've had the pleasure to talk with many people, including Palestinians, Christian Arabs, Arabs that have received through vision Jesus. And so I really see that the religion itself, as voiced by the Arabs that are have left Islam, just to quote them, it's a religion of Satan. It takes away liberties. These new believers had to keep themselves quiet by secret meetings and so forth.
Yes.
So it's not a religion of freedom or peace. That's just totally false. And it's as Christianity, you can't have both. And except Christianity, it's through conversion and the Word of God and the Holy Spirit. But through Islam, it's the sword, and it's always been that way.
I might just mention that yesterday, my commentary was on persecuted Christians. It was about the World Summit in defense of persecuted Christians, and that was one of the topics we addressed. And of course, we've had Michael Yosef on talking about this, Avi Lipcomb, and all sorts of other individuals. So again, as one of our callers just the other day said, Louis, the ultimate answer, obviously, to all of the problems that we face in the Middle East, and certainly to some of the great challenges of Islam in the 21st century, is the gospel. So I really appreciate the fact that you've been involved as a Navy chaplain, speaking to those and encouraging them. And again, we certainly recognize that there probably are more Christians than we know, because if you are a Muslim and convert to Christianity, you're not going to change your passport from Muslim to Christian, because there are really dire consequences to that. So we may actually have many more believers out there than we might even know because of some of the persecution. True?
I believe that. And these people that have had an encounter with Jesus become very active in their ministry, but they do it with a lot of care and trepidation. But they bring many people to Jesus.
So again, a lot of people say, well, is it a peaceful religion? Well, historically, it has not been. Are there peace-loving Muslims? Of course there are. We probably even live and work with and have people in our communities that are that way. But back to the point that Jim Dennison was making, there is a percentage, and if you want to use that 7% number, which I think might be low, but we'll just stick with it for a minute. Still, that says if you got 1.6 billion Muslims, that means 112 million are jihadists. And so we shouldn't be surprised, although we certainly do lament what took place in Manchester, England just a few days ago.
Yes, and there are more. And I think we have to, as a country, we have to be careful who comes to this country. And I feel sad for Germany and England and France that their liberty that they give their people has been a form of entry for people that hate them and are here for the destruction of their countries. I feel sad for them, but at the same time, I know that the Lord's message will prevail in all things.
Well, Louis, thank you for calling in, and it's great to hear that you have served as a Navy chaplain. Thank you for your service, and thank you for your ministry, and I hope you'll call back again.
Thank you very much, and continue to speak.
Again, if you would like to join with us tomorrow, and we're just about out of time today, let me just mention again that number, 1-800-351-1212. Oftentimes what happens is near the end of the program, we'll have all sorts of people call in. We can't get to them, and we will certainly leave some time for that tomorrow. But let me finish real quickly with my point about a nation divided. We certainly are divided on a number of issues, and one of those issues is certainly one we'll be talking about tomorrow, and that is the issue of abortion. There's not a lot of middle ground between pro-life and pro-abortion. We get that, okay. But on many other issues, strikingly, I think Dirk Phillipson has something to really help us understand that this tribalism, which is fine in terms of rooting for your favorite football team or basketball team or whatever it might be over another one, is fine for sports, but it's really dangerous in politics. And the argument that he makes is really compelling. That is, if you could actually put people in a room, some of them are Tea Party members, some are Wall Street activists, Occupy Wall Street activists, and others, and maybe just other concerned Americans, you'd be finding a lot more agreement than you might think was there if you told them that they were just to share what their values are, what their goals were, without using political labels or catchwords. I think you would find people concerned about concentrated power, out of control change, and concerns about government that doesn't represent the people. And when you have only 19% say that they trust their government, it might be, I think, wise to begin to think through the possible implications of some of that. And so, again, he's saying that we need to get away from always this us versus them, and begin to recognize that we may have a lot more in common than we might imagine. And I've seen this even sometimes with the kind of interviews we've done. You know, there are times when I'll say, you can have somebody like a Pat Buchanan on the conservative right and a Ralph Nader on the liberal left, and on a number of issues, they end up pretty much saying almost the same thing about globalism and corporations and a variety of other things. So there are some areas of agreement, and there's some areas of possible cooperation that can and should take place. Even in this ongoing debate about health care. And just a couple of weeks ago, I took some time to talk about all the various issues where I think both Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservatives could agree if they were to get together. So we are certainly hopeful that some of that will take place. And of course, that's a conversation for another day, but we'll be talking a little bit more about this idea of a divided nation. And also, there'll be an upcoming Outlook magazine on that as well. As we get closer to Memorial Day, we also want to do a few things related to that. And, of course, we appreciate hearing from an individual that has worked in the military as a chaplain. But we also want to salute all of you that are part of that process and part of that large and growing number of individuals who have served their country in the past or are currently serving. And so we'll certainly have some things to say to you as well. But let me just, before we run out of time here, mention that we had in the first hour our Millennial Round Table. Grant Skeldon, who is with the Initiative Network, and Allie Beth Stuckey, who is the conservative millennialist. And we have links to their websites, and they're available on our website, pointofview.net. We have Grant's article on job hopping, a very good video by him on how to disciple millennials, and a video by Allie Beth Stuckey on no safe places and spaces. And so we're going to spend some time, obviously, getting into those issues in the future. But if you'd like to read about those or watch some of the videos, they're available at the website, pointofview.net. As you go there, I hope you'll also click on that button that actually says Join the Truth Team. We're dependent upon your financial gifts, and if you can help us out for as little as $1 a day, $30 a month, $360 a year, or even a one-time gift, that would be greatly appreciated as we're engaged in rebuilding truth in a post-truth culture. That's all we have for today. I want to thank Andrew for his help behind the scenes. Also want to thank Alisa and Melissa for their help, and encourage you to listen to us tomorrow as we talk about some more issues in the news and also this issue of abortion. That's all we have for today. We'll see you back here on Thursday.
When I heard Point of View explain about secular humanism, it drove us to really begin a school.
More than 30 years ago, Rodney Hare heard about a pressing need for the children of his community, and he took action, starting Liberty Christian School, that today provides excellence in academics and spiritual life to nearly 1,300 students and their families. Rodney knows without Point of View, that legacy would not exist.
Without those of us that are able to really help substantially in giving sacrificially, Point of View will never be as strong as it could be. We cannot let anything happen to Point of View Radio.
Giving sacrificially means something different to each of us, but each of us can do something. Discover what you can do at pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. Please don't put it off. Take that step now and join the Truth Team. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.